मानुषी संवाद में आप सबका स्वागत है। वेलकम टू दिस एडिशन ऑफ मानुषी संवाद। फ्रेंड्स, ये पार्टीशन सीरीज जो हम कई दिन से चला रहे हैं उसी का एक नया हिस्सा है। वो है बंगाल का विभाजन जो 1947 में हुआ। अब सवाल ये उठता है कि दो प्रांत मुख्यतः प्रभावित हुए, एक पंजाब और दूसरी तरफ बंगाल, असम भी। परंतु ये जो पार्टीशन ईस्ट की तरफ हुआ उसकी जानकारी बहुत ही कम है। पंजाब के पार्टीशन की जानकारी कम से कम लोगों को है कि हाँ पार्टीशन हुआ, और प्रभावित फैमिलीज बहुत सी आज भी उनकी याददाश्त है। वो लिटरेचर भी पढ़ा गया, नॉवेल्स लिखे गए, पॉलिटिकल भले ही इतनी स्टडीज ना हुई हो, परंतु कम से कम लिटरेचर में उसकी पहचान बनी। और जो बंगाल का पार्टीशन था वो कोई कम भीषण नहीं था, फिर भी उसकी याददाश्त बहुत धूमिल है। इसके क्या कारण है, इसके ऊपर चर्चा करने के लिए और प्रकाश डालने के लिए हमारे साथ आज तथागत रॉय जी, जानी मानी हस्ती हैं। इनका परिचय मुझे देने की जरूरत नहीं, वैसे भी डिस्क्रिप्शन में दिया हुआ है। तो तथागत जी, वेलकम टू this edition of Manushi, and welcome to the partition series that Manushi has been carrying out for some days now. तो आप बता सकते हैं मुझे कि क्या बात है जो विभाजन बंगाल का हुआ, वो कम जानकारी है उसके बारे में। हालांकि गांधी बंगाल में गए, गांधी पंजाब में हिंसा रोकने नहीं गए, बंगाल में नावकली में गए थे। तो क्या फर्क रहा इन दोनों प्रांतों के विभाजन?
मधु जी, मधु किशोर जी, मैं बहुत आभारी हूँ कि आप ये बहुत महत्वपूर्ण विषय श्रोताओं के सुनने के लिए सामने लाए। आपके जो चैनल है, आपके जो पोर्टल है, उसके तहत ये विषय पर मैं कुछ 20 साल 30 साल से रिसर्च कर रहा हूँ। और इसी प्रश्न जो आप उठाए हैं कि पंजाब का पार्टीशन के बारे में इतना चर्चा हुआ, बंगाल के पार्टीशन के बारे में इतना क्यों नहीं हुआ, ये ही मुझे बहुत दिन से question has been troubling me. So I have been trying to research in this particular subject, and I have reached certain conclusions that I would like to place before your listeners. मैं थोड़ा अंग्रेजी और थोड़ा हिंदी में बोलूंगा, इसलिए कि मैं कभी औपचारिक ढंग से हिंदी सीखा नहीं, ऐसे बातें बातों में और पिक्चर देखकर सीखा, पर चला लेता हूँ हिंदी। तो अंग्रेजी में बोलूंगा, हिंदी में भी थोड़ा मिक्स करके बोलूंगा। सो बंधुओं, ये मौलिक प्रश्न जो मधु जी ने उठाए हैं, the question has been troubling me for a very long time. The question has been troubling me for a very long time, and I have not been so far, I had for a long time not been able to find an answer to this. Then I started reading up on whatever is available. I started asking people who had been affected by this partition. And what I found was really surprising, which I'm going to place before you. I saw that the Punjab partition, as Madhuji had rightly said, the Punjab partition had been documented by a large number of people, among them Penderal Moon, who was a British ICS officer, G.S. Khosla, Khushwant Singh, Bhisham Shani, and from the other side of the border, Sadat Hasan Manto, and several others.
Amrita Pritam.
Amrita
Pritam. Also Amrita Pritam.
Of course, Amrita Pritam. And this is a thing that I was missing in respect of the Bengal partition. And that is why I started asking people, as I said, and I eventually came to the conclusion that there are a few books. It is not as if ऐसा नहीं है कि कोई पुस्तक नहीं है, इसका कोई documentation नहीं है, पर पुस्तक जो है, documentation जो है, वो सारे बांग्ला में है. तो ये समझेंगे तो सिर्फ बंगाली समझेंगे, बाकी दूसरे भाषी जो है वो नहीं समझेंगे. और तीसरा विषय ये है कि इस विषय पर इसका कोई अंग्रेजी ट्रांसलेशन नहीं हुआ. और एक चीज दिख रहा है कि हमारे जो सरकार है, हमारे जो हिस्टोरियंस है, ये हमेशा इसको छिपाने के लिए, in order to sweep this under the carpet, they have all been very eager so that people forget. And once the people who had seen it, they die off, there will be no record of this. So I somehow decided to set right this imbalance. And I have finally managed to put together a book in English. This is the book that you see in front of you. This is called My People Uprooted. And this is published by Synergy Books of Delhi. In this, I have compiled this book by interviewing people and also by studying literature, whatever literature is available. Among the people who had written this are there are writers, you wouldn't know their name because they've written only in Bengali. There is one Prabhas Chandra Lahiri, then there is Sukhranjan Sengupta, then there is Keshav Chandra Sinha, and a few others. All of them have written in Bengali. So I translated their work and I put together this book. Now let me go into what happened in Bengal, and thereafter I'll come to the reason. Yes, please.
A point to add and a question. Is it also because the capital of India, British India, had shifted to Delhi? And refugees, when they descended in large numbers in Delhi, the national media was there to pay attention. The international media was there to make note of the fact that all these refugees were coming. By contrast, Bengal's refugees and the way they came and tried to rebuild their lives, there was much less media attention on their arrival from East Bengal. Is that also likely to be the reason for less importance?
That is a contributory factor, but that is, I would say it is a subsidiary factor. Let me first tell you what was very briefly, what was the sequence of events in East Bengal which drove the Hindus out. And the total number of Hindus who have been driven out, as I have estimated, is roughly 1.2 crores. 1.2 crores, that is 12 million Hindus have been driven out of the landmass that is today known as Bangladesh, earlier which was known as East Pakistan, and even earlier it was known as East Bengal. There was tension between the two sides, between Hindus and Muslims. For a long time, the tension was being whipped up by the Muslim League. Now, in 1935, in the British Parliament, an act was passed called the Government of India Act, which legislated that in each province of British India, there would be an election. So there was an election in Bengal, which was held in 1937. In 1937, in this election, no party got an absolute majority. The Congress, which had the support of Hindus, did not get a majority. Muslim League, which was an avowedly communal party, that did not get a majority. And the third party, which was called Krishak Praja Party, and which was led by Fazlul Haq, also did not get a majority. Now, about this third party, everyone knows about Congress and Muslim League, but about this third party, very little is known. This party is in some ways akin to the Unionist Party of Punjab, which was led by Sir Sikandar Hayat Khan. This particular party, although the Unionist Party was a party of landowners, and this was a party of cultivators, ryots, and people like that. Their members were all peasants, cultivators, and the like, and they were practically all Muslims. But the agenda of the party was not communal. They were not asking for anything to do with Muslims. They were asking for, the relief from interest, lowering the rate of interest, giving fertilizers to cultivators and things like that. All peasants' demands, and reducing the pressure that the zamindars were putting on them for realizing their khazana, that kind of thing. So this could not be called a secular party, but at the same time it was not a communal party. So when neither of the three parties got an absolute majority, the obvious thing for the Congress would have been to form a coalition with this Krishak Praja Party. Very, very strangely, the Congress did not do it. And in the process, the Congress pushed this party into the arms of the Muslim League. Now, the members of this party were all Muslim, and Muslim League was an avowedly communal party, so the two got together very cozily. And thereafter, the Muslim League practically swallowed this party. They kept Fazlul Haq as the chief minister, or then they used to call it the prime minister of Bengal. But at the same time, he did not have much importance. The government policies and everything were being drafted by the Muslim League. This party started abject partiality towards Muslims. And this process went on. In 1941, there was a brief interlude during which Fazlul Haq came out of the party and formed a short-lived coalition with Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee, and they formed a coalition called the Progressive Democratic Coalition. But at that time, there was a governor in Bengal. His name was Sir John Arthur Herbert. He was a great conspirer, and he was very much partial to the Muslim League. So this ministry was not allowed to last, and after some time, the ministry had to resign, and Muslim League had come back to power. After that, right up to 1947, the Muslim League remained in power. Meanwhile, riots started. First riots, there was riot in Dhaka city in 1941. But at that time, the riots were two-sided. You know, the Hindus had a lot of strength, and the British Indian police, with all their faults, the police were not partial. They were keeping law and order impartially. So in this manner, this process went on. Then in 1947, Congress considered partition. Meanwhile, there was in 1946, there were two very notable events. One was the Great Calcutta Killings, and the other was the Noakhali carnage. You have posed the question as to why Gandhi ji went to Noakhali and he didn't go to Punjab. I'll answer that a little while later. He not only went to Noakhali, but on Independence Day, he came to Calcutta. Why he did it, I'll answer that. See, the 1946 Great Calcutta Killings was started by it was engineered by the Premier of Bengal or Prime Minister of Bengal. His name was Hussain Shahid Surawardi. And this Surawardi was doing absolutely communal whipping up of tensions. And on the 16th, he declared a holiday from the side of the government. And then he, in Calcutta Maidan, he made a speech in which he said that you go and get your Pakistan. The entire audience was Muslim. He told them that you go and snatch your Pakistan. The police will not come in the way, military will not come in the way. I have made sure of that. Then this marauders, they went out and they started murder, mayhem, looting, everything. And the police and the military, they were sitting quiet, doing nothing. This process went on for 2 days, 16th and 17th of August, 1946. Then from the 18th of August, the Hindus, the Bihari Hindus comprising Bengali Hindus under the leadership of one Gopal Mukherjee, also known as Gopal Patha, and the Bihari Kalwars, ironmongers, and the Sardars. Sardars at that time used to control the transport business in Calcutta. The Sardars, Bihari Kalwars and Bengalis, they started hitting back. And they hit back so hard that Sohrawardi could not imagine they could do it. Now, immediately after that, so by the 20th of August, the riots had ended. But after this, another set of disturbances started in a district called Noakhali, which is now in Bangladesh, and which has got a very small, which had a very small Hindu population, roughly 20%. And right now it has a Hindu population not more than 3%. So this Noakhali district, there was a leader called Ghulam Sarwar who had started whipping up anti-Hindu tensions. An estimated number of 1,000 Hindus were killed in the process, and very large number of Hindu women were raped or they were snatched away. They are untraceable, and very large number were forcibly converted. Now, all these things, this unnerved the Congress. At that time, the total support of Hindus in the country was with the Congress. The Hindu Mahasabha was there, but their support was very small. So the Congress was unnerved. And at the same time, they were also thinking that when shall we get power? When shall we get power? So we saw that in spite of Nehru calling the partition proposal, Pakistan proposal, fantastic nonsense, and Gandhiji calling the Pakistan, Gandhiji saying, vivisect me but not India, by their entire thing collapsed. And in March 1947, they both conceded Pakistan. What Jinnah wanted, they got. In this scheme, it was decided that Sindh, Balochistan would go lock, stock and barrel to Pakistan. There would be a referendum in the Northwest Frontier province, which is now known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan, and the district of Sylhet in Assam, and Bengal and Punjab provinces of British India, they would be partitioned. They would be partitioned, and this partitioning was left to an English barrister called Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who was entrusted with this thing, who was chosen for this job because of, you know what, a very strange thing, because of his ignorance of India, because he knew nothing about India. So it was considered that since he knew nothing about India, he would not have bias towards either Hindus or Muslims. So this process started and the country was partitioned, Bengal was partitioned. Now in Punjab, as soon as or even before the partition decision was announced, rioting started. Horrible rioting started. We all know some of these cases. We sitting in Bengal, we are quite aware of what had happened, that in Rawalpindi, the women had jumped into a well in a Gurdwara, and then all over the Western Punjab, in a place called Sheikhupura, a junction station, how Hindus were slaughtered, but Hindus and Sikhs were slaughtered, but there were countermeasures. As a countermeasure, in a place called Giddarbaha in Punjab, the Muslims who were trying to go to Pakistan were slaughtered. But the upshot, the final result of all of it is that there was bloodbath, but there was total exchange of population between the two Punjabs. By 1948, January, there were no Hindus and Sikhs left in Punjab, except in a few places like Nankana Sahib and all that. And there were no Muslims left in Indian Punjab, except in a small place called Malerkotla. As opposed to that, in Bengal, there was no mass exodus as at the time of the partition, when partition was announced. And one of the reasons for that is that Gandhiji had come to Kolkata and he was living in a dilapidated mansion in a place called Beliaghata, and he was holding prayer meetings in his own characteristic way. Now you have posed, Madhuji, you have posed a very important question that when the communal trouble was raging in Punjab, then why did he choose to come to Bengal instead of going to Punjab? The reason is that if he had gone to Amritsar, let alone going to Lahore or Rawalpindi, if he had gone to Amritsar, people would have made mincemeat of him. Usko keema bana lete. Gandhiji did not go to Amritsar, where he was needed and where there was a bloodbath going on, let alone going to Lahore or Rawalpindi or Sargodha or some such place in Pakistan. Even in India, he did not dare to go to Amritsar or Firozpur. Instead, he came to Kolkata. And what he did in Kolkata is very surprising. He gave protection to Hussain Saeed Sohrawardi, who was the Prime Minister of Bengal at that time, and who was the main motive force behind the 1946 Great Calcutta Killings. Had Gandhi not come there on that day, on 15th August 1946, 47, people would have lynched Sohrawardi for the misdeeds that he did. But in spite of that, Gandhi did. And the question would arise, if Sohrawardi was so much eager to get his Pakistan, then on this date, why is he not in Dhaka or Karachi? Why is he in Calcutta? The reason is that I have got it from very good sources, but I can't name those sources. The reason is that he had a lot of Benami property in other people's names, but which belonged to him in Calcutta. And moreover, he had a large number of concubines in Calcutta. So yes, Sohrawardi was a great man that way, a real Casanova. This has been recorded by Jacqueline, Larry Collins, and the other person in the book called Freedom at Midnight, in which they have said that Sohrawardi had taken upon himself the stupendous task of bedding every high-class whore in Calcutta. Anyway, and Gandhiji went to Calcutta to save such a person. Also, Gandhiji's coming stopped any kind of exchange of population between the two Bengals, and this is the beginning of the misery of Bengalis of East Bengal. Thereafter, there was no great rioting like there was in Punjab, but the Pakistanis had started harassing the Bengali Hindus in East Pakistan. How exactly they were doing it? They were using economic methods. Say, for instance, the Hindus in East Pakistan at that time, particularly in the towns, they were possessed of very large tracts of immovable property, land, houses, other things. So these were being requisitioned right and left by the East Pakistan government, and the compensation or the rent that was being paid to the Hindus was a pittance, a very small amount. So with the result that all the Hindus who were affected by this, they decided to leave and come over to India. And also their women were subject to catcalling. They could not get out of home. East Bengal women were very liberated as compared to West Bengal women. But they had completely stopped going out of home because there was catcalling, there was harassment, they were chhed hota tha, this kind of thing. So this process went on. And meanwhile, there was police action in Hyderabad, in India. As a result of police action in Hyderabad, because the Nizam was a Muslim, somebody whipped up communal frenzy again, and there was some rioting, not rioting, one-sided pogrom in East Pakistan in 1948 and 49. As a result of this, pressure was brought down on Nehru, and Nehru got in touch with Liaquat Ali Khan, who was at that time the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and he signed an inter-dominion agreement. India and Pakistan were both British dominions at that time. So they signed an inter-dominion agreement that each country will look after its own minorities. Not one inter-dominion agreement, they signed two inter-dominion agreements. But the process went on. The Pakistanis went on harassing Hindu women. Yes. Yes.
What I remember of that inter-dominion agreement is, number one, Liaquat Ali made Nehru promise that no more Muslims would be allowed into Pakistan. Those who had stayed on should be allowed to stay here. They shouldn't be sent back. Secondly, that the Hindus of Pakistan are the President of India's responsibility, not that of the government of Pakistan. Am I right or am I wrong in my information?
I don't think there was any such thing. I think the crux of the thing, the substance of those two inter-dominion agreements was that each country would look after its own minorities. One was signed
I think we
before
need to recheck that. I think we should recheck the text of the Liaquat Ali Pact. I'll do the same and you do the same. And let's both check it out, because I think it was like the Shimla agreement, it was one-way stand up. Something similar happened in the Nehru-Liaquat Ali Pact.
Right. Nehru-Liaquat, but these two inter-dominion agreements were sort of ripples compared to what happened later. After these inter-dominion agreements in 1948 and 49, in 1950, when we were celebrating our Republic Day, in the month of February, a serious anti-Hindu pogrom was started by the Pakistani authorities. They had instructed newspapers to print false stories about torture of Muslims in Calcutta. No such torture had taken place, but they were printing stories. Some paper called Pashwan, they first printed a story that 10,000 Muslims have been killed. Then another story, some 20,000 Muslims have been killed, something like that. The Chief Secretary of West Bengal went to confer with the Chief Secretary of East Bengal. And while he was there, a woman was doused in red paint, and she was paraded all over the Secretariat. And people said that she is a Muslim from Kolkata, Muslim woman from Calcutta. The Hindus have cut off her breasts. And after that, there was terrible strike. All the Secretariat employees went out. They did their namaz in a place called Victoria Park. And then after that, they started attacking Hindu houses. And these have been documented by a writer called Prabhas Chandra Lahiri. But the book that he has written, which I consider a gold mine, it is now completely out of print. Fortunately, somebody has put it on the net and I have downloaded it. It is available in PDF. Now, coming back to the subject, then after this, For 2 months, this kind of pogrom continued. Horrible pogrom, mass killing of Hindus, particularly in the districts of Dhaka and Barisha. It is estimated that 1 to 2 lakhs of Hindus were killed. How many women were ravished? How many women were snatched away, kidnapped? Nobody knows. But the Hindus ran for their lives. There was no chance of their making complaints to the local police station or anything of the sort. This kind, while all these things were happening, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was pressing Nehru to do something to bring about exchange of population as had done in Punjab. Now, by that time, Nehru had become very bold because Gandhi was dead, Sardar Patel was ailing, and he said in Parliament that we will never have any exchange of population because the Muslims who have stayed back here, they have reposed their trust in us. So Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee said that this exchange of population took place in Punjab. And at that time, you had put all these highfalutin ideas of yours in cold storage. So I asked you to put them in cold storage again and then arrange for this succor of East Bengali Hindus. But Nehru did not listen to him. This process went on. Ultimately, a reprisal started in West Bengal. As soon as the reprisal started, Liaquat Ali Khan woke up. Before this, Nehru had a number of times given proposals to Liaquat Ali Khan to hold joint inspections. Liaquat Ali simply rubbished him, didn't listen to him. But as soon as this thing started, the reprisal started against Muslims, Liaquat Ali Khan immediately cabled Nehru that he wanted a pact. And Nehru jumped at it. And he inked a pact on the 8th of April 1950 in which it was written practically the same thing as what was written in the Inter-Dominion Agreement, that each country will look after its minorities. This was called the Delhi Pact or the Nehru-Liaquat Pact. Now, as a result of this pact, the pact itself was politically stupid because it could not have been unknown to Nehru that all these people who had died during the last 2 months, they had been killed by the complicity or by the direct action of the government itself. I just mentioned one case. There is a very, very big bridge in Bangladesh, or at that time East Pakistan. It is called the Meghna Bridge. At that time, it used to be called the Anderson Bridge. On this Anderson Bridge, it is about 1 kilometer long. On this Anderson Bridge, all the trains which crossed this bridge on the date of 12th of February 1950, all trains were stopped in mid-river. All Hindus had their throats cut and they were thrown into the river. All Hindus. I have this this is recorded, of course, by Prabhas Laidi. But apart from that, I have it from an eyewitness who was saved only because he was wearing pajamas. Because at that time, Hindus used to wear dhotis and the women used to have sindurs or bangles on their hands. And that is how Hindus could be easily identified. But this person was wearing pajamas, so he was safe. He told me this story. He had seen it with his own eyes. So this kind of thing could not have happened without the complicity of the government. But it happened and Nehru ignored all of it. This particular mindset of Nehru has been commented on by the eminent journalist Durga Das, who had said, Durga Das is a Punjabi. Durga Das had said that Nehru used to live in his own world of make-believe. And if the make-believe world clashed with reality, he chose the make-believe world. He did the same thing with Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. Anyway, so this thing happened. And as a result of the 8th April 1950 pact between Nehru and Liaquat Ali Khan, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee resigned from the cabinet. Then he came out and conferred with a lot of people including the Guruji Golwalkar, and founded the Bharatiya Janata Party. And after that, the rest is history, everyone knows. But after this, the Pakistanis took a decision, very conscious decision, that they will not start a riot or pogrom this way. What they will do is they will try to squeeze out the Hindus out of East Pakistan the way we squeeze out toothpaste out of a tube. And they started the process with the result that Hindus started coming out of East Pakistan, coming out of East Pakistan and coming to India. But meanwhile, Nehru had taken a position that since I have signed the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, there would be no torture, no persecution of Hindus in East Pakistan. So therefore, we need not arrange for rehabilitation of Hindus who are coming away from Pakistan because they will go back to Pakistan. It's a fantastic thing to say, but Nehru said it, that only because he had signed that pact, knowing fully well that Pakistan will not honor that pact. India will honor, but Pakistan will not, but Pakistan did not also. So this process went on. Meanwhile, even after the thing was, this pact was signed, there was in 1951, there was a massacre of Hindus in a station called Santahar. It's a junction station, important junction station in present-day Bangladesh. Then in East Pakistan, there was a massacre of Hindus. All the train Hindus who were traveling in that train, they were killed. Then there was this process of squeezing out went on. In 1964, there was a process of sudden burst of anti-Hindu pogrom again following the Hazrat Bal incident in Srinagar. The Srinagar, you would remember that hair supposed to have belonged to the Prophet of the Muslims. It was lost. And jihadi anger had been created. And this anger had to be vented on the poor, helpless Hindus of East Pakistan. Anyway, then after that, there was 1971. And meanwhile, the squeezing went on. Even in the Bangladesh period, the squeezing has been going on. Now, coming to the most important question that you have very rightly posed as to why this partition, why this torture, persecution of Hindus did not receive the attention that the Punjab partition received. See, the first reason, one reason you have already pointed out that the Punjabi refugees, they came to Delhi, which was the capital of the country, which drew the attention of everyone. And they came in a huge mass, except in that between February and March 1950, there was no mass exodus. The rest of the time, there was just that squeezing out sort of thing. That is one reason. The big reason is that, yes.
One second. I think you mixed up the two. What you're saying is that Punjabi refugees came in a large mass. There was mass exodus,
Yes.
and therefore they got attention. By contrast, in Bengal, it was toothpaste squeezing out, daily squeezing out. There was no massive outflow in one go. Am I right? Is that the reason?
There was massive outflow only in February, March 1950.
Okay.
Other than that, other times there was this squeezing out. So this, naturally, a massive outflow will receive much more attention compared to it. But the more important thing is that because of the influence of Nehru and the complicity of the communists, they chose to hide this thing behind the screen. On this particular issue, Nehru and the communists were absolutely on the same page. And their intention was to make sure that this truth did not come out, because they, according to their thinking, if the truth came out, it would cause people to polarize on religious lines, which they thought was not compatible with their kind of secularism. So in the process, history got obliterated. That is not something they bothered about. History got obliterated. And in the process, this kind of thing went on. And gradually, people started forgetting about this. The first generation of people who had come away from there, they remembered it. Then the subsequent generations did not know. And a sort of a mindset started developing among people, which put forward certain excuses for or certain justifications for having been driven out of East Pakistan. You must have heard of Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is something in which the victims, they start sympathizing with the tormentors. This exact thing.
Not just sympathizing, they fall in love with the tormentor.
They fall in love. Exactly, this thing also.
They become willing slaves of the tormentor and then start enjoying their own oppression, or start imagining that what's happening to them is something right and good, and they justify it. That's really more than
right,
just...
But this, you could call this a modified Stockholm Syndrome, in which they did not exactly enjoy their state, but at the same time, they justified the Muslims driving them out. And they manufactured a lot of excuses. I have made a list of these excuses. I'll just very rapidly go through them. Number one is the forgive and forget, or let bygones be bygones. Number two is two wrongs don't make a right. Number three is there is a reason they were also wrong. They were also wrong means the Hindus were prosperous, the Muslims were poor. The Hindus tormented the Muslims, so now Muslims are taking revenge. Number four is this might start a riot. If you say these things, if you record the history, this might start a riot. Number five is there was equal brutality on both sides. Absolute nonsense. There was no brutality on the Hindu side. Number six is many Muslims saved Hindu lives. This is an argument that you will hear from a lot of people. Oh, these Muslims they were shedding tears, and when some of them came all the way to the Indo-Pakistan border and then they bid us goodbye, they were awash with tears, this kind of thing. But the fact that their properties were all grabbed by the Muslims is totally forgotten. Number seven is, it is all the fault of the British. The Muslims are not at fault. It is all the fault of the British. Number eight is, their religion is like that, what can you do? Number nine is, number nine happened during the post-2001 pogrom. The communists said that this is a fight against the Awami League, not against Hindus. Number 10 is the classical, the Marxist agreement. This was an economic struggle in the guise of a religious struggle. And number 11 is there is the negationist argument that all this never happened. You know, there are people in Europe even today who did not think that the anti-Jewish Holocaust never happened. They are called the negationists. Anyway, that is a punishable offense in many European countries, but over here we have not made it a punishable offense. So it is as a result of this joint efforts by the Nehruvian. Yes, you have a question? Yes.
No, I just wanted to support what you said. Of
Yes.
all the 11 reasons that you've given, to the best of my mind, in the academic domain, the most popular, the most respectable was the one that the leftist historians offered, which is it was class war, it was class struggle. It was not religious persecution. And I remember distinctly in the early years of Manushi, you know, we even published an article on the Tathagata movement, which was again to do with anti-Hindu violence. Am I right? The entire Tathagata movement, wasn't it also aimed against the Hindus, landowner Hindus? And it was presented in this glorious light of class struggle. Just as in Malabar violence case, what the Mutlas did they all came up with this similar kind of explanation.
Yes. And Gandhiji supported the Moplas.
That's right.
Gandhiji supported the Moplas, saying that they are God-fearing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
no, and that they are courageous Muslims. They live up to their faith. So your faith tells you,
exactly.
and your dharma is to get slaughtered chanting Hindu Muslim bye-bye.
Annie Besant had lambasted Gandhiji. I mean, she had very strongly criticized Gandhiji on this funny stand. But this was Gandhiji's stand right through, not only during Mopla massacre, but even later during the Kohat massacre of 1924. Anyway, the final outcome was that these, the communists had been working in Bengal for a very long time, since the 1930s. And the cultural and the literary space had been left unexplored, had been left unoccupied by the Congress, with the result that the communists got in and they put in their communist ideas, their communist logic in the heads of a lot of Bengalis. Then in 1950, when that great pogrom took place in East Pakistan, and people came in hordes, and then Nehru signed that Nehru-Liaquat Pact. What had happened is that the refugees received terrible treatment from the government of India. The Punjabi refugees were well looked after. All these first thing, there was two-way movement. So the Muslims went and the Muslim properties were made available to the Punjabi Hindu and Sikh refugees. Then colonies in Delhi like Kalkaji, Old Rajinder Nagar, Lajpat Nagar, all these colonies were created for the Punjabi refugees. Then in the Pilibhit area, a lot of jungles were cut down to provide agricultural land for Hindu and Sikh peasants. All these things, none of these things were done for the Hindu refugees. Because Nehru kept on saying that they will go back, I've signed the pact. He made it a matter of prestige for him, and that was the end of it. So this was taken advantage of by the communists. Just one second. This was taken advantage of by the communists. They penetrated the refugees and they convinced them that your salvation lies only on the communist path, and in the process they obliterated this history. Yes, your question, please.
You said no colonies or special enclaves are created for Bengali refugees, Hindu refugees.
Right.
I'm puzzled why and how. In Delhi, we had an EPDP colony, East Pakistan Displaced Persons,
which
is now known as Chittaranjan Park. Yeah.
Yes.
How come it came to be created in Delhi, not in Bengal or in Calcutta?
When was the question? The answer to that question is, when was EPDP colony created?
In 60s, 70s.
In the 60s. By that time, the bulk of the movement of the Hindus from East Pakistan was over. That is number one. Number two is that all this, how much time do I have?
Continue, don't worry.
Okay. So number two is EPDP colony was made available basically to middle class Bengalis who had come over from that side and who were resident in Delhi. Persons who were resident other than in Delhi, say for instance in West Bengal, bulk of them were in West Bengal, or in Andamans, or in other places like parts of Uttarakhand and UP. They didn't have the chance to get plots in EPDP colony. It's only the middle class Bengalis, even upper middle class Bengalis, who got plots there. So EPDP colony is neither here nor there. So what I was saying is that this way, because they're taking advantage of the horrible treatment that Nehru and his government did to the East Bengal refugees, The communists took advantage of it. They make inroads into them, into the East Bengal refugees. They also convinced them that this is not the Muslims' fault. This is an economic struggle. The zamindars had persecuted the Muslim peasants, and this is the result. Completely forgetting that the Muslim peasants had driven out the Hindu peasants. Muslim clerks had driven out Hindu clerks. Zamindars, of course, had no problem. Most of them had houses in Calcutta, and they didn't bother. So these are the absurdities that were present in the communist argument. Not only that, the communists did a lot of other very serious mischief. Like, for instance, when Dr. B.C. Roy, the Chief Minister of West Bengal, with a lot of effort, arranged for the rehabilitation of the refugees in Andamans, these communists tried to convince the refugees not to go to Andaman because they said that it's a horrible place, it's a penal colony. Formerly, prisoners used to go over there. But in spite of that, the Bengali refugees who went to Andaman, they have prospered. The ones who were convinced by the communists and who did not go to Andamans, they had to go to Dandakaranya, which was a very inhospitable place. Then later on, they tried to come to West Bengal. Then the communist government, by that time, the communists had come to power in government in 1977. They did a mass murder of these refugees, East Bengal refugees, whose cause they were espousing earlier. They did a mass murder of them in 1978 in a place called Marichapi. So this is more or less, in a nutshell, the entire story of, to answer your question as to why the East Bengal exodus, East Bengal refugees did not receive the attention that the Punjabi refugees received. But I hope that my book, which so far happens to be the only comprehensive book in English on this particular subject, my book will clear a lot of doubts. It has run into 4 editions so far, and generally it is being well received. And I think it will go some way at least in clearing the matter. I've also tried to encourage other historians to go into the subject so that they can throw some light on it. Thank you.
Few questions now. May I come up with? Okay.
Yes, please.
One, curiously, when you were talking about them convincing the Bengali refugees that don't worry, you join the Communist Party, we have the solution for you, and no other party, and many refugees believed them. There is a film, I'm sure you've seen it, a very famous partition film called Garam Hawa, and made by Satyu. In that also, the end is this Muslim family feels it's going to be difficult for them to stay back in India because Hindus overall were hostile to their presence, continuing presence. And in this case, again, as they are going towards the station to catch a train to Pakistan, the son sees this protest demonstration with communist flags against unemployment, which is a communist demonstration. So it's like economic rights of Hindus and Muslims together. And the son wants to join that protest demonstration. Earlier, the father had resisted. And then he says, yes, they both get off the Tonga and join the protest demonstration, which is to say they decide to put their fate in the hands of Communist Party of India. That's Garam Hawa's submission. Now, it's interesting that the Communist Party lived up to its promise towards Muslims. It made sure that they got more than equal rights in India, that even a scratch on a Muslim face or body got global attention. And then they made sure that Hindus were presented as fascists, as anti-minority.
Quite correct.
Tell me, the point that I'm going to raise is they didn't do similarly well with Hindu partition refugees. They did not only not take care of them, but actually slaughtered them so that they would not dare come into Calcutta or any of the big cities. The point that I'm puzzled about, can you think of any other country in the history of human society where leaders have actually fed their own people to the wolves? Because these were all mostly Hindus, right? Communist Party leaders or Nehru or many of these congresses were Hindus, right? And yet they fed Hindus to the wolves and did not bat an eyelid. That's my question. Do you know of any other country where this has happened? Normally, people are hostile to the other groups, the othering that left
That
is
is the
very
obvious thing. That is the obvious thing.
But nowhere in the world I know of any other place where people have fed their own people to the wolves and are callous towards the suffering of their own people who've suffered not just today and yesterday, but for 1,000 years at the hands of these barbaric invaders. How do you explain this?
Ma'am, that's a very interesting question and it calls for a counter question. Do you know of any other country which can boast a person like Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi? This process started, as you rightly said, in 1921, when some 10,000 Hindus were slaughtered by these Moplas, and Gandhi supported them. They supported the Moplas, saying that they were God-fearing, that they were fearless, that they were doing what their religion told. Can you imagine any country in the world which would have a leader which said like this? But somehow he had such a mesmerizing effect on the masses that people accepted it. And thereafter it became the usual way of thinking of Hindus. And the large number of subsequently what had happened, particularly after independence, is that a large number of historians sprang up, so-called historians, I would say, historians sprang up, who started writing history on these lines. That is why it is absolutely necessary to rewrite history. These so-called historians, they started writing history on these lines. Then Nehru patted their backs, gave them plum professorships, sent them on foreign jaunts. In those days, it was very difficult to go abroad. Sent them on foreign jaunts. So they became famous. They became famous and they made this theory famous that it is never the Muslims' fault. Actually, it comes down to a sort of a dictum. You know, in medieval England, there was a saying that king can do no wrong. The dictum of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was that a Muslim can do no wrong. This is the basic trouble, the basic problem, and this is what we have to fight against. A Muslim can be an honored citizen of India, but why should he not be capable of doing any wrong? If he has done wrong, he must be condemned as strongly as a Hindu should be condemned if a Hindu has done wrong. Sorry. You have muted yourself. You have muted yourself.
I said, my first question is, could you give us an accurate idea of what was the percentage of population, Hindu population in East Bengal in 1947 before the killings and the exodus started?
Yes. The Hindu population, according to the 1941 census, was 29%. But this tells only part of the story. All prominent positions in society, the civil servants, the teachers, the lawyers, the doctors, these were very largely Hindus. Muslims had a very small representation among them. Muslims were numerically superior, and they were superior only among ordinary peasants. In no other category they were superior. Then this was the trend. Now the population, Hindu population in Bangladesh, present-day Bangladesh, is about 8%. But that is the official figure. A lot of people say that it is underestimated for political reasons. It is actually a little more, sometimes something around 12%.
So anything from 8 to 10%. And what is today the Muslim population of West Bengal? What was it in 1947? How has it increased?
Yes. According to 1951 census, the Muslim population in West Bengal was about 20%. Today it is more than 30%. Now, so that is a paradoxical thing, because most people will think that because Hindus have come away from East Pakistan to West Bengal, the Muslim population in West Bengal percentage would reduce, and the Hindu percentage would reduce in East Bengal. Hindu population would reduce in East Bengal. Now, Hindu population has reduced all right from 29% to say 10%. But on the other hand, the Muslim population in West Bengal has increased. Why is that? The reasons are twofold. Number one is the procreative genius of the Muslims. They procreate and they openly canvass. There are books in the market. They openly canvass against any kind of birth control. This is number one. And number two is huge infiltration. Huge infiltration of Muslims had taken place in the particularly post 1975 during the rule of the Siddharth Shankar Roy's Congress government, then the 34 years of CPM, the communist rule, and thereafter during Mamata's rule. And a large number of these people have been supplied with papers because they form a vote bank. They've been supplied with papers. Many of them have got citizenships, even passports. That is the position.
Is it not ironical is a very mild word. Jinnah and others, Muslim League, insisted on Pakistan, saying Hindus and Muslims are two different nationalities, they can't coexist.
Yes.
But there are more Muslims today in India, and there were more Muslims even in 1947 who were left here, not sent there.
Yes.
And today, just as Bangladesh is constantly sending its Muslims into India, similarly, if the Punjab border were to open, I'm told half the population from there would come into India. I mean, they say they can't coexist with us, but they are desperate to come and live with us Kafirs. Is it only for the purpose of conversion and taking over the rest of India? Or is it also a certain fascination for the freedom that Kafir society offers?
I think it is both. The freedom that Kafir society offers is certainly an enticement. Also, the fact that it's economically more advantageous to come and work in India rather than in Bangladesh or in Pakistan. Pakistan is fast becoming a basket case, and I don't know, it will possibly in the near future it will become a Chinese vessel. As opposed to that, India is progressing. So they are coming to India and they are being received with open arms by the so-called secular parties because they serve as a vote bank.
Would you agree that the BJP leadership is following the same Nehruvian policy? They're not taking a firm stand against demographic invasion and also against special privileges given to this very destructive, domineering community that is hell-bent on taking over all of India and converting it into an extension counter of Pakistan.
See, ma'am, in these matters, I have my own views. Right now, I am in no position of responsibility in the BJP. Once upon a time, I was a state president, and later I was a member of the National Executive. Right now, I have no position. but I still have some loyalty, so I have some difficulty in saying something against the stand of the BJP. I can only tell you my personal stand, which does not always agree with the BJP. And I think that it is extremely paradoxical that after Jinnah had declared that the Hindus and Muslims are two different nations and they cannot live together, we have let the Muslims live on here and given them advantages. This was entirely Nehru's doing. If Sardar Patel had become the Prime Minister, as most of the Congress committees in the country wanted in 1947, things would have been different, but Mohandas Gandhi pushed Nehru. And Sardar Patel died a heartbroken man. I don't know, but we are suffering.
Okay. Finally, my last question to you is your own family history. Did they come from East Pakistan, East Bengal? And did they suffer?
My own family history. I was born in Calcutta. Actually, our family comes from a place called Brahmanbaria. Brahmanbaria, it is in the eastern part of present-day Bangladesh, very close to Agartala. In fact, my native village in the district of Brahmanbaria is hardly 35 kilometers from Agartala. And when I was the governor of Tripura, I had made a couple of trips there. But my father used to work for the Survey of India in Calcutta. So our family did not suffer in any way, our immediate family did not suffer in any way as a result of the partition. We were not driven out, or our women were not violated or anything of that sort. But our extended family did. My mother's Mosa, he had his head cut off. He was decapitated. He was a union board president, and he was discussing with some Muslims. Then another bunch of Muslims came and they simply cut off his head. This was pretty close. I mean, my mother's Mosa, but they used to live quite close to our own village. So this kind of thing happened, and I have seen people. In fact, when I was a kid, there was one room kept apart in our house for people people coming from Pakistan, and a constant stream of people used to come from our extended family. You know, in those days it was different. The person who is your Tauji's, something, even such a person, if he came to your house, you were obliged by the social mores at that time, you were obliged to accept him and let him live in your house. So that sort of thing used to happen. But and I had seen that thing. And another thing that really stirred my interest in the subject is when I was 8 years old, I was traveling through Sialda Station. Sialda Station is a terminal station in Calcutta which used to connect East Bengal. All trains of East Bengal used to start from Sialda, and the refugees, they all came to Sialda. The refugees who had any kind of employable skill, they went out and they had relatives over there, so they found some kind of employment somewhere. But the people who had no employable skills, like the peasants and the fishermen, they lived in they sat down on Sialda station, concourse, they ate there, they slept there, they even defecated there. And I remember when I was 8 years old, I was passing through Sialda station. It was a veritable pigsty, a total hell. I was with my father. So I asked my father, I was a very curious kid. So I asked my father, who are these people? He said, my father was a very secular man. So is my brother. You know, my brother is an MP from Trinamool Congress. He and I are politically poles apart. So I asked my father, who are these people? My father said, they are refugees. I said, what is a refugee? Then my father tried to explain. Then I said, finally, that why don't we drive those people out from here? Then my father got very upset and said, I'll give you one tight slap. So I shut up. But the question remained. Question continued to trouble me. Much later in 1964, when I was in engineering college in third year or fourth year, some boys came and enrolled in our class. Now, in an engineering college, people don't enroll in the third year or fourth year. So I was wondering where these people had come from. They said, I got to know them. They said that they were students of the East Pakistan University of Engineering and Technology, BUET. Now it is known as BUET. At that time, there was this Hazratbal incident, and that jihadi anger was being vented on the Hindus of East Pakistan. So these people had run away, and they had come to India, and some of them came and enrolled in our college, in Bengal Engineering College. I am still in touch with one or two. They are very bright people. Many of them afterwards emigrated to US. So to sum up, my family, immediate family, did not suffer. But certain other things happened which stirred my interest in this subject.
My last question. In 1947, there were about 8% Muslims left in India. Now they are, who knows, 20%? Nobody really knows, because the census doesn't give us an accurate figure. And Muslims are very good at deception. So they have dual names, dual cards, all that. So we don't know. But at least 18% to 20% is the popularly accepted figure. In Bengal, they were also
they were 20%, now they are more than 30%.
Then they were in East Bengal, in Bangladesh, there were, you said 29%, and today 8%, maybe 9, 10, whatever. The point is, if these 8% could expand to set up so many mini Pakistans, why could Bengali Hindus not do the same? Because at that time, Bengali Hindus were not so cowardly in the way that we Hindus have become in post-independence India, thanks to Nehruvian and Islamic Qawmi education. Why is it that they couldn't expand? Why is it that they couldn't retaliate? Because we have a direct example.
Main reason is that they have no leadership. Apart from that, to retaliate against an Islamic state power with a huge population and a huge majority is not easy at all. And I must confess with great regret that my own people, that is Bengali Hindus, when they were confronted with this Islamic trouble, they did not try to retaliate. They did not try to even resist. They just ran for India, including the leaders. And particularly the communist leaders. They all ran from India. Jyoti Basu, Pramod Das Gupta, all these people, they have East Bengali roots. They all ran to India. The few people, very few people who had stayed on in East Pakistan and who had suffered horrible deaths, some of them like one Dhirendranath Datta, who was the first person to demand the official language status for Bengali. He was the very first person to demand official language status for Bengali. In 1971, he stayed on until 1971. In 1971, he was dragged to a cantonment and tortured to death, literally tortured to death. So, together with his son son was Dilip Datta. A lot of people were killed like that. There was one Satyendranath Sen who was also killed like that, who was jailed 10 times. First by the British and second by the Pakistanis. But none of these people became communists. The communists all ran to India and then they started preaching their Marxism here.
If I personally have moved so far away from Gandhian goody-goodyism that today I'm convinced that Hindus as a society, as a community, gone? Yeah. Today I'm convinced that Hindus as a community, as a dharma, our Sanatan dharma, our culture, our faith traditions cannot survive under the shadow of Islam. Therefore, to be goody-goody and say we must aim for equal rights, no tushtikaran, I think is not possible, because Islam does not accept you as equals under any circumstances. Their mandate is to destroy you, to slaughter you, or to convert you. What should our response be if you had the power that a leader needs in order to implement a clear-cut agenda of action? What would your guidance to Hindu community or to state machinery be?
You put me in a spot, but I'll take your bait and I'll answer. I think the best way to handle this problem would be to freeze the percentage electorally. You know, in the British days, the Hindus and the Muslims, they had separate electorates. Actually, Hindus had no electorates. They had a separate, they were classed as general. The Muslims had a separate electorate. The British had a separate electorate. So we must have separate electorates, and these electorates must be frozen. Irrespective of what the census said 10 years later, 20 years later, we should not be bothered.
Tathagata ji, I think that's ballooning in cloud cuckoo land, because Muslims are not going to accept any curbing of their rights, number one. They don't go by democracy. They only use it to undermine it and to capture state power. They've done it.
I quite understand, but whatever.
No, 1 second. I believe that, number one, Pakistan continues to tout Kashmir as the unfinished agenda of partition, number one. Secondly, Islamic groups, even within India, openly declaring that Ghazwa Hind is their mission. And some PFI-like organizations have already said 2047, and they will be in charge of all of India. They would have Islamized all of India. If they can do that, I see no reason why we can't talk of Hindu Rashtra and our unfinished agenda of the partition be total transfer of population. Please take these liabilities back. There'll be assets for you there. We've taken good care of them.
I completely agree that we must have a Hindu Rashtra, and in order to do that, we must redraft our constitution. It has been 72 years since we have had our constitution. We gave ourselves our constitution. It is not God or Allah or anyone who gave us our constitution. So we can very well take it back and write a new constitution, but
and suspend democracy and suspend democratic farce for at least till some decade.
I won't go as far as that, but the point is that this
you can't do that if communists have veto power.
I'm not getting into any argument, Madhuji. And I have to conclude now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate your time. And you're a very forthright person, but I understand there are territories you can't tread into, and therefore we'll stop. Thank you very much. Tathagata ji. Dhanyavad. Shubhratri, Vande Mataram.
Shubhratri.